as they should be given. And I am ultimately just sort of a layman as far as that. I'm not an expert on psychological interpretations of the drug addiction. I experienced it in the other people around me. So my dad, I don't want to give his biography, but I kind of want to hit a few of the highlights of his life because they set up the shadows that were cast over my entire life that I had to cope with. And the price that we had to pay was as a result of the choices that he made. He became a Hells Angel like late 50s. It was Sunny. They created the Oakland chapter. They started spreading out groups, outlaw motorcycle gang, one percenters. They didn't start out as a bunch of crooks, right? They started out as a bunch of guys who drank too much and rode motorcycles and were soldiers who came back from either combat or the war, or they had some sort of drive to be adrenaline junkies, and they wanted to ride motorcycles and be hedonistic. And ultimately, that was the beginning. It was more like I had a kind of innocence to it. If the stories that I've heard are entirely true. And so throughout those years, the 60s was for him, it was all one big long party. And some of the stories that he told us are family lore. They're kind of legendary for our family. He knew Jerry Garcia, the Grateful Dead. He dropped acid with them. He knew Janis Joplin. Him and his friends would go to Janis Joplin's apartment after Grateful Dead concerts, and they'd scoop up Seconal pills off the floor, and they'd eat them by the handful, and they'd come down. They'd crash. My dad used to talk about watching the candelabras melt on acid while eating the Seconal off the floor of Janis Joplin. And the club they were what they were. Not all the legends, the mystique. You've got this popular culture idea of them as being these bad guys with golden hearts, right? They've got hearts of gold. They're kind of these rebels that truly live the American dream because of their motorcycle riding, and they love riding high, living free. That was one of Sonny's books. What a monumental egoist he was. So, and you have this mystique where, well, we don't do what we're told. We do what we want. And this drive of we're independent, we're free. And then of course the drugs and the drinking. And in the beginning, they could mix it up in a barroom brawl. They'd beat up some people would beat up on them. Other bikers, they'd mix it up with the police. Oakland police really didn't like them. That picture that Chris showed us, I think from 1965, and there was a big anti-war rally, and the Hells Angels broke that rally up, and they beat the hell out of everybody over there. They just trashed them. It was like a riot. So I was born in 1973. I'm not going to give my entire biography either, but just being born, all of that was affected collaterally by all the drugs and by all the alcohol. My mom ended up out in California, and before she ended up with my dad, she was with a couple of other members that, they weren't very nice to her, right? Women were treated very poorly by the club, right? And amidst all the club members, my father was the most level-headed. So you keep that in mind. All the stuff I'm going to be telling you, right? My dad was the most level-headed one. That's why they sent him to talk to Sonny on the TV station in 1967, because he was very intelligent, well put together. He could be very charismatic. He could be, very charming, right? And he was often the guy that told the other members to calm down when they had a crazy drug-crazed plan in mind to go hurt some people who disrespected him or something. It sounds stupid when I put it like that. He was the guy that said, no, guys, we're not going to drive over to so-and-so in the middle of the night and drag him out and beat him up and intimidate him. He'd be the one to calm people down, if that makes any sense. But my mom wound up with my dad. I was born 3 months pre-me. I don't genuinely know all that went into how it occurred. But part of the mystique was when a woman is property of the Hells Angels. She is literally belongs to them. And so she has to do what she's told. And this is the 70s, so what are women often what they were told to do, even in run an everyday, work-a-day society? Clean this up, do this, do that, do this housework, do that housework. How it exactly occurred, my mom was a tiny little woman. She was trying to move a refrigerator to get behind it so she could clean behind it. She was 6 months pregnant. The reason why she was trying to do that was probably because the pressure that they'd put on her was so extreme that she didn't dare challenge them to say, no, I can't do this, I'm pregnant, that's not something that I can do, okay? But it's what she did do, and the refrigerator kind of ended up falling, and she caught it, but pushing it back, so it wouldn't fall on her, it must have it generated premature contractions. Now there was that song, do you know the song, Give Me Shelter? The lady singing that female lead ended up losing her baby because she hit that high note. Right before she hit that high note, she'd opened up a heavy, heavy, heavy door to get into the studio where they were. And I'd heard this on Professor of Rock. And that kind of, so you can be set into premature contractions. If you move heavy stuff when you're pregnant, it is not good. You don't want to do that. And so I was born 3 months preemie, Oakland Hospital. I shouldn't have survived being born. I was 3 months preemie, I weighed 2 pounds, 2 ounces. They had to put me on oxygen immediately. And my dad's response, and I learned this decades later, right? My dad wasn't really there for my mom, right? My dad basically was like, and they told my mom and dad, well, this child's gonna die. Maybe that played into this, I don't entirely know. But I wanna give you this to give you some idea of the mentality. And this mentality can be created by rampant drug use and even rampant criminality. The irresponsibility that comes along with it, or the unwillingness to take responsibility. Because basically what my dad said to my mom is, look, Shelley, this is your problem, you deal with it. I'm not dealing with this. And he went off to do whatever he was doing, be a club member. So, beyond everybody's expectations, I ended up surviving. But I was blinded. They didn't know that for a few years, that my retinas had detached. But 3 months later, we moved across the country. Dad was in the process of moving out to this little town in Maine, the East Coast, right on the ocean. So 3 months later, my mom, I was strong enough to travel, and they followed him. My dad lived in this old sprawling farmhouse. They called it the ranch. It was kind of like a retreat. And of course, it's my dad, so he built it into like a giant fortress. He loved guns. The house was full of ammunition. Big 2-story wooden old farmhouse. Well, 6 months, I've been alive 6 months on the earth now, okay? The house catches fire and it burns to the ground, right? Completely burns to the ground. My dad, a few hours before the fire, he recounts this. This is like family legendary. I mean, he's dead now, he can't. But he said he woke up from a dead sleep, doesn't understand how he woke up. Shouldn't have woke up. He took handfuls of tranquilizers, but he woke up and the fire had begun. Of course, he's breaking out the window, he's getting out, and my mom and I were trapped on the 2nd floor. My mom held me out the window. She didn't want to, and she was already getting smoke inhalation, and I had too. And my father said, drop the baby, I'll catch him, drop the baby. But he missed. So I bounced out of his arms, landed on the ground. Meanwhile, the house is beginning to blow up behind us because, as I said, it's full of ammunition. My mom, she had to jump after me. Fire almost killed us both. The fire trucks that came to try to put out the fire weren't able to do so for several reasons, probably the most prominent of which is there are tracer rounds going off that are blasting into the harbor 100 yards down the road. All those bullets were unmarked, right? Carved all the markings off the bullets. Well, they're all blowing up now. There was so much, I think the fire had such strength to it. It was sucking the oxygen out of everything around it. And it was so cold that they couldn't even start the fire trucks. It was a total loss. So the house that I grew up in was built as a result of that fire. And the house, and Chris has seen it. He's been my friend for practically as long as we've both been on the earth. It was basically a cement slab that they laid down on the ground, and they put up these walls and put little posts up and then hung curtains as partitions. And it really was just a poorly built 4-car garage. It's basically what it was. And everybody who was building it was loaded. And they got more loaded as the day would go on. Each day they're working. So you could see how everything was out of alignment. Everything was put in wrong, disproportionate. And of course the drug use, it didn't stop. And my dad suffered a severe back injury. So now he had his illegal drug use, but then came the drug use, pain pills, post-op surgery pain pills, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, the whole shebang. And so the environment I was cast into was this strange kind of broken realm. It wasn't quite the Hells Angels, but it wasn't normal society. And my dad never really fully transitioned out of that until he got sober almost 20 years later. And even then, he never really quite escaped its shadow. And so I grew up in this chaos, this total chaos of everybody. You'd have parties every night. You'd have people coming in. There were no doors. You had curtains. You'd have people coming in a few feet away doing their party. They'd have their piles of cocaine on the table. They'd be smoking their weed, having their conversation. To them, it's a great party. Well, he can still party even though he's kind of messed up. If you're growing up and that's your role models, your adults, if that's the context of the world that you're living in, and the stuff they're talking about bordered on desperately scary. They talked about violent stuff they'd done when they were in the club. They talked about people they'd hurt. They talked about people that had been killed. They talked about stuff that had been stolen, crimes, And at 5, what do you know? You don't know what that stuff means when you're like 5 or 6, but I literally heard about one of them that was murdered, mistaken identity, and I heard that in great detail, 5 or 6 years old, how many shots it took to kill him, how many others were killed, why they were killing them. They thought that they were informants that had infiltrated, and they had, but they were going after the wrong people. And that really left me with a prevailing sense of uncertainty in a deep way, in a deep level. Not like, how do I put it? When some of your first formational memories are of humans that are friends, and one of those friends kills another one of those friends, right before he blows his brains out, he whispers, "I love you," bang. That leaves you with a kind of a perspective normal people don't have. Ordinary kids don't have. And I tried to be an ordinary kid, even though I was blind. I tried to be a kid that rode a bicycle. I didn't have enough vision to do it, but I did it anyway. I tried to be a kid that joined the Cub Scouts. I wanted to learn all that cool stuff, building fires, going out, camping. My older brother did that stuff when he was younger, Cub Scouts, knew woodscraft and all that. And I'll never forget when I did Cub Scouts, haltingly, I did, and it was time to go to Webelow Scouts. I was like maybe, 10, right? So it's time to go to Webelow Scouts. And so they handed me this great big thick book that I couldn't read. And the lady said, "Okay, now it'll be great. You've done your Cub Scouts, you got your merit badges and all that." I'm like, "Yay, and now you can be Webelow Scouts." And I'm like, "Yay, what's Webelow Scouts?" And Webelow Scouts is something that you do with your father. Oh, and I'm holding this book that I can't read, and I just was, I guess that's over. And it was. My dad, by that time, he was an absentee father whose body was still there, but he wasn't. So my mother divorced him. He didn't beat her up, but he didn't treat her well. He wasn't there as a father or as a husband. He was over-medicated by doctors at the VA, and he was happy to be over-medicated. He was a drug addict. He didn't protest. The pain that he was in by now was probably amplified by the drugs he was taking, the narcotics, the various tranquilizers, the whatnot. And my mom was basically like, "I'm not going to sit here and watch you die. I'm not going to making the kids sit here and watch you die." And she couldn't really get us very far away, but she tried to get us out of there. But no sooner had she left when another person in our orbit, and he was not even 19 years old, he turned out to be an alcoholic, the man who became my stepfather, me and my brother's stepfather, a severe alcoholic, okay? And from the time the kid was maybe 10 or 11, 12, he was drinking. He was a piece of work, right? And so she went from an absentee husband, absentee father, to something almost worse. The kind of the focus that an alcoholic will give you. They want you to focus everything on them. Mom used to try to be available for us children. She could try to be nurturing, but when she got together with Mark, he did everything he could to make that not happen, right? I mean, and he's dead now. He's been dead for a long time, so I can talk about this too. He was jealous of us, of her children, jealous of the attention that she needed to give to us because we were her children. Jealous of me and felt a tremendous hatred for me because a child with special needs, right? Nope. And the times when he would try in the beginning, when he first was moving in, he would take me on a tandem bicycle. He tried to do the right things. He couldn't manage it for very long, but he did it long enough. And once somebody is in your home, right, and you're in that pattern of alcoholic adjustment, you're never able to stabilize long enough to take stock of your situation. You're always having to react to that person's behaviors, their outrageous and excessive behaviors. They're drunk too much, they're driving their car, they crashed it. They drunk too much, they got arrested, you got to bail them out. They drunk too much and they stole a bunch of stuff, and now you've got to kind of help them hide the stuff, or you've got to, you've got to respond to their unending mood swings, right? To their unending angry outbursts. And one idea, if you're experiencing this from the outside, okay? So if normal people, I'm talking about alcoholism at this stage, they'll say, I think I'll have a toast. I want to have a drink to celebrate this new beginning, or let's have a toast for a new business venture, or we're going to start a new creative project, or and they'll have a toast or something to celebrate, okay? And then you have normal people, they'll go around and they'll say, gosh, I've had an awful day today. I'm just going to have a drink to calm down, okay? Well, so for the alcoholic, the day is it's just an excuse. It's just the reflex of an excuse to drink. It does not matter. I had a great day, feeling great, think I'm going to pound a 12-pack now. And they drink. My day's so horrible. People ask me, why do I drink? You want to know why I drink? You kids, you drive me to drink, blah, blah, and you drink. And every minute of every day, and every occasion, every occasion, a good one, a bad one, a holiday, doesn't matter. You always respond the same way. You drink. And usually the drinking results in the same conclusion. You're in a wretched, unbelievably bad mood, and you do destruction, emotional and verbal, physical, to everyone around you, everyone. And he had a tremendous amount of meanness in him. And at one point, he literally tried to blow us up. He had a rifle, and he was shooting it at a gas grill. The sparks from that bullet hitting the metal, it could have ignited, it could have blew up, because their argument had gone out of control. And he shot it, he missed it, like 2 feet away, but the second or third time he hit it. It is one of my more favorite childhood memories. When the cops did come and they finally arrested that guy, nothing really bad happened to him, but I did have that brief moment where they cuffed him. I heard the cuffs, and the guy starts crying. Oh, it hurts, oh, take him off, oh my God. The hammer never comes down on them, right? It never does. Their crises, when drug people, alcohol people, in active throes of addiction, when they're talking about crises, it doesn't mean what it means to you and I. Because to you and me, a crisis is, there's something that I want to do, the crisis prevents me from it. I want to travel to see so-and-so in another state, but I haven't the money to visit them, but they have to see me. Okay, and that's an obstacle. A crisis, my vehicle's broken, how am I going to get to work, okay? For drug and alcohol people, there's only one crisis. How do I get more of my drugs and my alcohol? That's it. All that they want, more drugs and alcohol. Every desire that they have is subsumed and buried because they only have one desire, more drugs and more alcohol, okay? And anything else that conflicts with that won't happen. So that includes, hey, we got to do this stuff for the kid? No, I want more drugs and alcohol. I've got to drive him to go to some game to be part of a peer? No, I want more drugs and more alcohol, okay? That's why families become dysfunctional, because people aren't willing, they're not able to commit to any other goal, to sacrifice or to compromise or to interrelate in any manner, because they want their drugs and they want their alcohol. And it's difficult to process as an outsider because you're not on the drugs, and they still act like there's someone there to talk to. You still have them saying things. Oh wow, well, I won't drink as much, and I'm gonna do better now, or I'm gonna do a better job this time. I know I drank too much, and it's always obfuscation and lies. And I've noticed in my own personal experiences that oftentimes when people develop these habits when they're using, it's very hard to shake when they get clean, and most of them don't. So a lot of times people in recovery, and not all of them, but many, they'll recover partially, but they don't quite have it in them to take full responsibility. They never actually will come clean and say, except in there are rare cases who do, I'm sure, but they won't really say, I hurt everybody in my life every day of it that I was using. And I did so because in some way or one form or another, they interfered with me and the path to my drink or my drugs. And so in a way, that's where a lot of the vindictiveness comes from, because they're trying to prevent them from their sole desire, their heart's goal, more drugs, more alcohol. And so the kind of meanness that comes out of these people, that's why. That's why they don't want to be impeded. They certainly don't want to make any sacrifices, anything that would actually interfere with the pathway to their drugs or to their alcohol, right? And looking at it from that lens, when you noted the dysfunction in families, why is he beating up on her? Well, probably she told him to not drink as much. Well, you're drinking too much, and I don't shut up, and so he smacks her around. Someone gets an OUI, a DUI. Now you have to compensate for them because they cannot drive, but they still got to have their drugs and their alcohol, especially, and their booze. DUI makes more sense for a booze example. So now you've got to have somebody else driving. And what else I would often see is because it wasn't just my family. We had people around us, and they were all in the lifestyle, using drugs and alcohol. Okay, you would often have people who could never own anything in their own name anymore because they owed too much money, they had too many debts and fines and warrants, whatever it is that they had. So they would need to have their partner, their girlfriends, their spouse, whatever it was, put everything in their name and then give them everything. Right? So, you can see. So, my dad was also taking drugs prescribed by doctors. So, he was a patient at the VA. He was a Navy veteran. So, he would often take these long drives. It was maybe an hour drive to get to Augusta, Maine, from where we lived on the coast. He'd drive up, and they would give him shopping bags full of bottles of pills, bags and bags and bags of pills. And he would drive home after eating those pills and having a drink. And he would drive home. And this went on for years. My parents had been divorced, so my stepfather didn't want the kids underfoot on a weekend. They interfered with his drinking. He had to get rid of us. It didn't matter that Dad was a compos mentis father. He wasn't there, right? He wasn't competent. But at least my father, I could tell that he loved us kids. He did love us boys. Whatever else was wrong with him, and a lot was. There was never that sense of malignant meanness, But that doesn't mean he was a good father. He wasn't. He wasn't there. He wasn't there. And my younger brother, my father never went to his games. Not one. It interfered with his drugs and his alcohol. Why was he going to do that? Or he was in a state where he was too incapacitated to do that. And my mother, I wouldn't call her an alcoholic, but she certainly misused alcohol, partially because when you're surrounded by it, you're going to end up partially doing it to belong, to soothe maybe some of the tension, but partially because you have the misguided belief that maybe the drinking will help me cope with this nightmare, And so that's how other people get drawn into somebody else's spiral, their perfect storm, And I grew up with all that. My older brother became a narcotics addict. My older brother had a really bad childhood. And by the time he'd ended up moving out from California to where we were, 10 or 11, he was brilliant. By the time he was 13, he was doing drugs with my dad. My dad's logic was, I know he's doing them already. I don't want him going out and getting them from some stranger. He gets the cocaine from me. I know the coke's good. 13, right? 13. My dad did eventually get clean, but I have mixed feelings about that experience as well, that he got clean. He did very well for a number of years, but part of me can't help but feel like, to some extent, he never quite confronted the truth of what his illness might have been. He never did. He was willing to say, because it's fun to retell the stories, all the great parties, all the great fun, and he'd immediately qualify, but it wasn't really fun, and I'm glad we're in NA. I wouldn't say that he was insincere at his attempt in recovery, but I think he was incomplete, and he didn't grow up. He didn't face it. When my dad got clean, I was 17, 18. And I felt like my 52, 3-year-old father was younger than I. I'm 52 now. So I have some sense of the level of maturing that one has to achieve to reach 52 and still be a viable human being, right? But Dad was shielded from needing to mature because he was on drugs and alcohol. And when you're on drugs and alcohol, even if you are called to being accountable, you can't be held accountable because you're immune to accountability. You're on your drugs and your alcohol, right? And at various points repetitively in my life, that has come up over and over. We've had other people drawn into our orbit that have had issues with chemical dependency. When you've been exposed to these things, you tend to see it as more normalized. Whether you mean to or not, you let it into your life, and it keeps recurring over and over. You make bad choices. You make bad relationship choices. If you've experienced this, the secondary damage can be very emotional, and you'll go for the familiar, even if the familiar is toxic, right? And your gyroscope is smashed because the only way you can see to compare with is a lot of drugs and alcohol. You don't have normal people to look at and go, here is my yardstick, here is my grounding, here is my measure. You don't have that. So even if you've never taken these drugs or alcohol, or if you've used them not in an excessive or abusive way, your personality is similar to that of one suffering from the disease in certain aspects. Emotional dysregulation. You can't process crises and problems when they come to you in an effective way because every button is on all the time. You're always on an adrenaline. You're always waiting for the next crisis. What's going to break? Who's going to break it? And you don't learn the proper coping skills. You don't learn the full range of your emotions because you don't feel them. In that environment, you're an adrenaline rush 24/7. You're always responding to somebody else's crisis. You're always reacting to someone else's traumatic outbursts or rage or violence or whatever it might be. And in my life, I've interacted with other people who were drug and alcohol abusers. And I assumed, well, I'm steeped in this. I can handle this. I know all the tricks. I know all the nuances. I had a sister-in-law that definitely proved me wrong. And I'm bringing this point up because I'm not sure our understanding in popular culture is the correct understanding of this disease. And so this person was addicted to narcotics, had a tremendous amount of trauma, lost a sibling, become addicted to prescribed narcotics, and was trying to get off of them. And began to drink to compensate for the lowering of the dopamine, and then the opiate, the neurotransmitters downregulate. So when you're trying to get somebody off of something like heavy narcotics, and even if you're using methadone to stabilize their neurotransmitters, people will often begin drinking more. And this was also someone who had a drinking problem. So watching this person go through this, and I mean in self-destruct, she really imploded and brought a lot of people down with her, okay? What I came away with was the sense that in popular culture, we have this mindset. So let's imagine that I am a drug addict. So I have the mindset, I'm taking the drug. I'm getting high, the drug's hurting me, it's wrecking my health, it's blinding me, and I'm making bad decisions. So all I have to do now is quit taking this drug, and I've solved my problems. And then this will all go away, and everything will be fine. And that's why you have people they want to quit drinking, but they'll always relapse, because they think the only problem I need to solve is to quit the drinking, and the rest will take care of itself. And it's not true, because the real problem, the drinking is like the symptom. The drinking or the drugging is kind of the symptom of a deeper underlying problem, behavioral, personality, trauma created. You're responding to something traumatic. It's not the taking of the substance. That's not the disease. It's not the effects of the substance when you've taken it. That's not the disease. It's the repetitive and dysfunctional behavior that involves the taking of the substance and every other behavior that you exhibit as a result of taking that substance and or needing to get more of that substance, right? It's a diseased pattern of behavior from a diseased person, a whole person. And none of this happens in a vacuum. So, all around these people, like matchsticks, they fall like matchsticks, right? Are everybody else who has to pay the price for their bad decisions, for their delusional thinking, for their misguided choices. And some of the emotional effects that it has, if you're secondarily experiencing other people, their reactions to you are not uniform. They are not constant, predictable. They're not something that you can trust. You come away, as I said, my metaphor is, with a smashed gyroscope. You don't know how to measure somebody's sincerity necessarily. And what does this mean? It plants a seed in you of a lack of self-confidence. It plants this thought in you. Well, why are these people like this? In some way, I always am not good enough. And I can't get these people to treat me more nicely, and I can't predict when they'll be nice to me and when they won't. It doesn't matter. You could be kindly to someone who's a drunk or a drug addict, and they'll appreciate it and be good to you. You could be kindly, and they'll call you, they'll emotionally, they'll attack you, or they'll even do something worse. Maybe they'll rob you. Your actions don't elicit the correct responses, right? When you turn on the light, you expect the light to come out of the bulb, don't you? When you're kindly to someone, you kind of expect social reciprocation. So they're living in a destructive, nihilistic way that breaks you down when you try to interact with normal society. And we have a problem even in our ordinary, run-of-the-mill, day-to-day society of being melodramatic and expanding. Everything is always more serious or more dramatic than it needs to be. But you don't have a sense of judgment. You don't have a sense of emotional control. You don't have a sense of the consequences that you could pay yourself for acting out of turn, for being too aggressive, for being, you don't, how much time are we?
You got about 25 minutes.
Because I might have made a mistake. I went maybe a little bit too abstract. I might have gone a little too abstract, but...
You can switch it up. You got 25 minutes.
Yeah.
You can course correct.
Well, a great story that I want to tell because it's one of the funniest memories I've got. And Chris was there for this. I wanted to go visit Chris, and we were both teenagers. I was 17, he was 16. We were in high school, and my dad barely knew how to find his house. This was before he found any recovery that he found. And so he's asking me for directions to Chris's house. I don't know how to drive to Chris's house. I can't see. Well, Dad, you gotta. His house is across from the Backyard Goose gift shop, right? What? The Backyard Goose gift shop. Backward Goose. I don't know where it is. It's some white house. It's right across from his house. Okay. And the way my dad was taking antipsychotics, so he had the tardive dyskinesia. His words were always slurred. You tell him something, it would take him a long, long time to try to comprehend what you were saying. But here's the tale of, this is an example of consequences, right? He picked me up, came to pick me up. We got into his truck. He starts backing up at 2 miles per hour. He's backing up, it's a straight line. The driveway's curving, he keeps backing up, it's a straight line. The truck goes off into the ditch on the edge of the driveway. Sinks into the ditch, crashes completely off the edge, crash. And my dad, being completely loaded, stumbles out of his truck and, what happened? Why don't they make the driveway straight? I can't believe it. He just literally didn't make the slight turn when he drove off the driveway. And so now what do we do? Okay, so the first thing I got to do, now I've got to go tell Chris, and I'm embarrassed. Dad drove the car into your ditch. He drove his truck backwards into your ditch. What? Oh, so now I got to go get Chris's mom. Okay, we got to tow Dad's truck. He went off the ditch, and now it's in the woods, in the bushes. Oh. And so the first thing I think to do is I call my mom and my stepfather. My stepfather was drunk, so he wasn't going to do anything. He wasn't going to come over to pick me up, and he wouldn't have wanted to anyway. So we ended up having to go to Chris's family, the family that lived next door to them. Try to explain this to them, and my dad, he's stumbling around, he can barely talk. And these guys, I could feel their eyes, they were looking at me like, what the hell, what the? And they could see the truck, and they could see it's off the road, and my dad, I had to speak for my dad, he couldn't speak for himself. I'm just like, can you help out, can you? And it really was Chris's, he had to, look, we need to get the truck out. And they towed the truck out. But that family, why did they have to interrupt their day to come drag my dad out of that driveway? The area effect of collateral damage, for people using drugs and alcohol, it's tremendous. There was a very bad metaphor that they used in the 80s, but to some extent, they got something. They did get one thing right. They used to teach us kids, none of you would remember this, but during the 80s, there was a big push, an anti-drug push, and a dare, don't use drugs and all that. And Nancy Reagan and her Just Say No, okay? And I had utter contempt for that woman, Just Say No. So, I lost my train of thought. So in the DARE program, they had a metaphor about family dysfunctions caused by people's drug use or whatever, their alcoholism abuse. So the family's on a raft, and the raft is floating level, but the drug person is always destabilizing the raft. Unpredictably, you can't really gauge, you can't brace for it, but it doesn't matter. You still have to always move to compensate so the raft won't fall and it won't trip. So I had a lot of ambivalence, even for the fun stories my dad would tell in his AA and NA meetings. I used to accompany him to those meetings after he got clean. He had a few good years. That raft example taught me it isn't just in a vacuum, and it isn't just enough, I hurt myself, it's a victimless crime. Like, everything you do, other people need to respond to it. And they need to change their whole lives around, and everything involved in their lives to respond to it. And the damage that does, and it's like being bathed kind of in acid. You're in an emotional, dysregulated environment, and you never can build your own center and act for yourself. You are always acting in reaction to somebody else's need. And ultimately, what is that person's need? They don't need you to help them. They don't need you to reassure them. They don't need you to even to bail them out of jail. What they need is for you to get out of their way so they can get to their drugs or their alcohol. That's what they need. And that's the only thing that they know, the only desire that they have. That's why the families are very dysfunctional, because basically the drugs and alcohol turn the person that's using them while they're under their influence into a kind of sociopath. And so you've been reduced in that person's eyes to the vehicle, either the vehicle that's going to help procure in some way or other the substance, or you're the obstacle standing in the way of procuring it. And I have found in my own personal experience in families, even when people are genuinely honest, and I've been to a lot of NA and AA meetings, and this is not everyone, but I've always found that people will always pull up short, and they'll always try to shield themselves from facing the full responsibility of what they've done, even when they talk about working the steps. But they substitute working the steps, even if it's only working the steps within themselves, with rather a really intense recitation of the writing of the step as it reads in the book. And they think, well, we're reading a step meeting tonight, I can read it with vehemence. I'm working the step. Look how vehemently I read this text. I read it with such intensity. I'm doing it. They're not doing it. And alcoholics and drug addicts are past masters at lying to themselves and to you. And those lies always would serve the same purpose when they were actively using, procuring more of the drugs or the alcohol. And what is it when they're not using? Well, you want to be the center of attention. You still want to be the center of attention. You still want to be the life of the party, it seems, in my experience. They almost get they allow themselves a little bit of a freebie. When they retell those stories, they can sort of relive a little bit of, oh, it was so good, that party was so good. But someone had to pay for every single one of those parties. And usually it's children that have to. The neglect that occurs. Should I open it up? I feel like Chris?
Yeah.
Should I open it up in a way I feel like I've
For questions?
I've largely fulfilled my purposes. I want to illustrate.
If you want to.
Okay.
Any questions? Let's get some questions.
Because they'll help focus more.
Okay.
Based on your class. Because I ultimately want to say the rest of what I want to have to say to share, even personal examples, I hope it serves the benefit of being a benefit to the class, right?
Okay, so questions. Everyone should, in theory, have some questions to ask. But, just based on what he said, feel free to make up any questions you have. Yeah.
So earlier you were talking about your younger brother kind of got into drugs.
My older brother.
Older brother.
Mhm.
In what ways, or like, how did you cope and get away from doing that, or like going down that path? What were your motivations, I guess, to kind of stay away from it? Obviously, the things that you were surrounded by were negative, but were there
Yeah, well,
some-
part of the motivation was that being disabled, I didn't want to end up like that and deal with a disability. And so I had to cope with growing up as a teenager, a blind teenager. And I wanted a real life. I wanted to have a job. I wanted to have a family that wasn't dysfunctional. I wanted to have an integration into the world that was healthier and a bit more stable. I didn't want to go that way. I didn't want to have to worry about always being arrested or having to get money to get more of the drugs, or, well, you got a job for a few months, but now, oops, you lost the job, and I didn't need all that. I mean, I really wanted to go and get educated, which is what I thought would help me. And I wanted a career. And so that gave me, I guess it gave me enough of a sense of responsibility where it never, and I saw what they did to other people. I didn't even really want to experiment most of the time. I drank a little, nothing I'd write home about. I never did any hard drugs. I saw what they did to people. And so the idea of going ahead and doing that for myself wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to do that to myself.
All right. Next question. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
There's like different kinds of media. I would say the best example that comes to mind is like the show Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah.
Does that give a accurate light to what the
Sometimes they capture the feeling, I think. Where the way I grew up, there were a lot of Hells Angels around when I was a kid, and they'd come and go. But my dad was starting to retire from the club by the early to mid 80s. He was retired from the chapter he was in the East Coast. They did capture, that show seemed to capture some of the feeling. But it was also, that show was very contrived, wasn't it? It was just a Shakespeare play, right? Sons of Anarchy, that they revamped into being bikers. And made that a modern
King
example.
Lear-ish.
Yeah, you know what show really evoked to me the atmosphere of my home life more? Was The Sopranos. That kind, because in the midst of all this chaos, you're still having to live a normal life in everyday society. You kind of got that a little bit in the humor, the comedy, because I think it started out as a comedy. Tony Soprano's, he's this mobster, he's this bad guy, right? But he's taking his Prozac just like all the rest of us are. Oops. And he's in the Walmart just like all the rest of us are. That show kind of captured some. But in all dysfunctional families, you've got don't tell the secret this, don't tell that. Well, I heard real stuff that was going on in the club that telling in those days might not have been good. Might not have been good at all. Now everybody's gone. I don't know anything about the modern Hells Angels today, but the stuff when I was growing up still might have been relevant. And there were wars between gangs. And even though they weren't going to ride down and kill my dad, who'd retired by then, he was sort of out of the game, there wasn't an exact guarantee that they would not. He was a pretty big deal. And so you grew up in the shadow of this potential threat of violence from outside. And that never really went away, even my whole dad, most of his life. The years he was sober, the years he was helping other veterans at the VA, there was always kind of this sense of, could somebody take a shot at my dad? Somebody from another, for example, there are other motorcycle gangs that have often had wars with the Hells Angels, the Pagans, for instance, the Outlaws, the Mongols. They had wars back in the mid-90s. My dad had only been in recovery for 3-4 years, and a war broke out in 1995. And he had people coming over to his house talking about the war, asking him for advice. What do we do? How do we fight them? What should we do? He's kind of like an elder statesman for the club. But I don't think those shows, they don't quite capture it, but they capture elements enough so that when I'm watching it, I feel affinity. And I think that's why I like The Sopranos so much. There was a part of me that was like, this is somehow reminiscent of a world that I can kind of comprehend and understand. That does make sense, but
Yes. So just going back to my question, you mentioned that your disability was kind of your motivation for not using or abusing drugs.
I think for me it was. I think there have been other blind people in dysfunctional families that do. I know I've heard of people that are, I could be a drug addict as easy as anybody else.
But my question is, do you think your disability also at sometimes exacerbated some of the situations that was kind of going on?
Perhaps. But perhaps. It made my ability to cope with those situations, I was at a disadvantage coping with them, perhaps. Or they had an elevated impact on me, perhaps. But I also had conversations with my dad where that was one of his shields, where he would say, well, I know it was bad, but I mean, it wasn't that bad. Look, you overreacted to stuff because you couldn't really see what was going on, and it had a greater effect on you than it should have had. But that's kind of blaming me for my own trauma. And that's also kind of evading responsibility. Because that shouldn't have been, nobody wants to be told how wrong they are, but my dad didn't fully face up to the damage that he did. And he didn't fully take responsibility. And one of the things he would say to me was exactly that. Well, these situations were scarier or more traumatizing for you, or you got a bad impression, it was made a greater impression of badness because you couldn't see. And that was sort of his way of saying, well, I was bad, but not always all that bad. And that's what I mean by oftentimes people won't take responsibility. They won't actually face what they've done. And that's indicative of them not actually confronting the actual disease that they're suffering from. It isn't putting the pill in your mouth that's your disease. It's all your behavior dysfunction that opened you up to wanting to do that in the first place in an addictive way. And you've got to cope with that. So you quit taking the drugs and the alcohol. Now you've just begun your journey. Now you're really going to experience the actual illness now that you have. And I think people in popular culture, don't really grasp that. I think they think, I'll quit taking these pills. Everybody around me will eventually, they'll forgive me. And then, I'll be fine, because there was never anything wrong with me except that, well, I took these pills. Well, it was too much fun. I had a little too much fun, and it was fun, but now the party's got to stop. It's like, that is not it at all. Not at all.
Next question. Yeah.
Kind of wearing off a little bit, but I was just curious to see what your PhD is in and what kind of work you've been doing.
My PhD is in philosophy and religious studies. Right now I'm changing careers, and it's a pretty dramatic and drastic career change. I'm going to become a tarot reader.
Oh, wow.
How about your thesis?
The thesis I wrote about was writing about blindness and phenomenology, and I tried to suggest a lot of different philosophers. I'm trying to oversimplify it. They wouldn't understand it even if I went into it too much.
Okay.
Well, how do I put it? It's only because you haven't read the 400 philosophy books that I've read in order to write this thesis. But I wrote about blindness and the experience of embodiment and seeing. Because what I discovered in my dissertation is vision is an active sense. You choose what you look at. You experience your vision that you're seeing, it's in your body, and you have other qualities that your vision brings into you. Something you're looking at, you look at something and it looks cold to you, you might actually feel a twinge of cold. If you look at a heavy box and it looks really, really heavy, and you go over to pick it up and the box is really, really light, you're going to have a split second where you think that box is heavy, and then you realize how light it is. I looked at things like that. I was very interested in perception. I was interested in consciousness, probably because I was around people altering theirs for most of my life.
Next question.
I had to simplify, I'm sorry.
Makes sense though.
Okay.
Yes, question. Next question. Yep.
Do you think that volatility had a lot to do with it? Like, I know, like, guys in the military, like, a lot of them are alcoholics. They have good times. But with your situation, you didn't have, like, quite a good experience with drugs, alcohol. you think that had a lot to do with you being deterred away from that?
Because I wasn't having fun at the parties?
Yeah, or like your childhood.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, that could be. I mean, I don't have any street cred, but like I've tried soft drugs since I'm an adult. I'm 52 years old. I have a vague idea to some extent what they might have been experiencing, but yeah, that might be. Yeah, like being so mistreated or having people behave so poorly around me, it left me with a sense of conscience. Like I don't want to lose myself to going down this drain. I don't want to have everybody else around me hate me because I'm like not nice to them all the time, right? I mean, yeah, that might actually be a factor. I don't want to replicate what was done to me, and that I think that's what's most difficult for people with these disorders. You grow up in this world, and if you acquire that disorder yourself, and you're not fully conscious of it, and you're passing it on, and that's why you have the re-traumatization over and over and over. It's extremely hard to break that cycle. But if you want to have any kind of health in your life, it has to be broken, and that includes when you're joining into recovery. You're effectively trying to break all of your negative cycles when you enter recovery. And part of having to do that is to be very ruthlessly honest with yourself because you're in recovery. So you have to give yourself a room to be non-judgmental to yourself, but you also have to be very judgmental because you have an obligation to take responsibility for the injuries that you've caused as a result of drug abuse and alcohol abuse. To me that just, and because many do not, some of them, they'll take the full responsibility. And you know how hard it is to take responsibility for something you've messed up on a day-to-day, an ordinary day, even something mundane. Oh, what do you mean? I knew that sandwich was this or that. I should have picked you up at 5 and now I'm late, it's 5:30. People don't like being told they're wrong. And part of having to heal from this disease is understanding that every thought you've had, every emotion, every choice that you've made was wrong to the core. So I have empathy for why people would want to evade responsibility, but I don't have any sympathy. Because to me, that's part of what is required for the recovery, and it's part of what's required. If you want people to forgive you for the things you've done, they need to understand that you understand that they were wrong, and that now you won't repeat those actions. And people in recovery often relapse because they don't do these steps, I feel. Because there is a notion in popular culture where the root of the problem and its dimensions and its boundaries are, I like speed pills, I like snorting coke, I'll snort some more coke. Having stopped snorting coke, I am now better, right? Now I'm fully, we know, even ordinary diseases that we have, we know this isn't the case. Even if you've had a really bad flu, you're gonna have risk of stuff going wrong up to a year after. Sequelae, they call that, okay? You have secondary sequelae, so you've taken stress to your body. Now, we're talking about drug addiction and alcohol use are behavior patterns. And the drugs hit your dopamine, so they reinforce the behavior. It's not the substance in and of itself. I could take a substance. It's the repetitive action and the behaviors that go around it, and what they make other people do to have to cope with your behaviors and your choices, and the stuff that goes wrong because of your bad judgment.
So what was lacking with your father? So you implied that, yes, he was in recovery,
Mm-hmm.
but he didn't quite do it. He didn't go as far as he was supposed to or should
I
have.
feel like he didn't grow up completely. And I feel like part of that was he wanted to be the center of everything, right? He wanted desperately to be the life of the party, the center of everything, the guy with the stories. He used to tell these amazing stories. He was an incredible storyteller. He had an enormous charisma. I think part of him, he couldn't just accept everything I did was actually hurtful and actually damaged. He never really grew up. He never really took full responsibility. My older brother, He's gone now. His drug addiction wasn't because he watched too many rated R movies. His drug addiction was because Dad was giving him drugs when he was 13. His drug addiction was because everybody around him was taking drugs and having a good time, and he kind of wanted to be with them and have a good time too, didn't he? His drug addiction was because he grew up in a rough area around a lot of violence. Maybe they calmed him down. Maybe they made him feel better. All that stuff was on Dad because he didn't raise him, because he wasn't there as a proper parent. And he never really took responsibility for that. And my reaction was to be over-forgiving. And my other brother was still very, very, very angry, and he called him out. And in retrospect, my brother was right, and I was not. I mean, I was reacting from deprivation. I want my father. My God, I have a father now. He's back. But like I said, we used to drive around. We'd be driving around town on the way to his meetings or what have you. It was like being with a teenager, someone younger than my friends at the time. We were all teenagers. I felt like my father had a younger level of maturity than I did. We'd be driving along when he was first in recovery, and he would randomly just look over at me, and randomly, I don't know where it came from. He just randomly looked over at me and said, "Yep, that chick, put a flag around her head and have a fuck for Old Glory." He'd just randomly say these crazy, the first thing that would come into his head, you know? Like once we're going down the road, and, you know, "Cow vagina!" He just screams it out randomly for no reason at all. I'm like, "What?" I turned to my dad. I'm like, "What? I just felt like saying it. I had to say it." I'm like, "Okay." No, he had quirks. He always had to have, and these quirks
Definitely
didn't
had quirks.
leave him when he quit using the drugs. Okay, which is another kind of an intuitive reason why I think there's more to the drug addiction than the taking of the drug. It left him with damage, with sequelae, and he was nuts. He was a collector of World War II memorabilia, and he had to have it arranged just so. Everything on the coffee table, if the TV guide was a millimeter, the corner was a little off, had to be rearranged. I think they call it punding, okay, where if you're on a dopaminergic drug, often Parkinson's drugs will cause this, well, you'll have compulsive urges to rearrange and organize your stuff randomly, over and over and over again. And you don't stop that. And the collections, and he had to have there was a practice bomb in our tiny little garage house, whatever, and it was right in the hallway. So in order to get through the hallway to get to anywhere else in the house, I had to evade kicking over the patches that were on the floor in front of the chest, the trunk, because he had all these on display. You could walk in. My friend has seen it. He could tell you about it. And I'd be knocking the practice bomb down. So then I'd have to catch the bomb upright. Then I'd have to walk sideways between the bomb. The house really was a cement slab with rugs on it. And this was after years, so they'd done a lot to make it a better house to live in. When I was a child, there was no insulation. This is Maine, a Maine winter. No insulation, no walls, no doors. There were no doors. There wasn't a kid's bedroom with a door. It was just a curtain that hung. So that's why there was no shelter. That's why there was no, whatever they were doing 20 feet away in the living room on the table, cutting up the coke, we were basically separated from that at best by a little curtain. No, he had quirks. And the quirks did not leave him. And he had the way he would lose his temper, his thought processes when he would overreact. That did not change either. He maintained a lot of that. He didn't sort of develop tools to deal with emotional dysregulations, you know? So he could lose his temper at anything. And of course, so could the rest of us. We were all afflicted by this emotional dysregulation. Chris could tell you that I've had to learn patterns of behavior to cope. Because I remember when I was a teenager, I could never speak in a normal level, a normal volume. I could not speak in an ordinary voice as I'm speaking to you. Because the only way I could be heard was to yell as loud as I could, and over and over and over and over again. I mean, I really did learn, people on these drugs, if you need somebody to do something for you on these substances, just don't ask them. It's pointless to try to ask them. You know, they're not going to be there for you. They're not going to hear you. There's no one there to talk to. You know, there's no, and just coping with all that chaos.
Yeah.
You being blind,
Mhm.
does that do you think that amplifies your other senses, and also being in that environment through that trauma, everything, does that amplify it even more, you think, your other senses? Because you can't see.
I can't say. I didn't have sight beforehand to compare, to see if there was an amplification.
Yeah.
And I don't know about psychological effects. I'd have to see other blind people in similar environments and compare them to blind people in control environments, good families, where they were more nurturing and more paid more attentiveness to their needs. I couldn't say.
But how much can you see? Like how much can you sense and feel, hear and smell, and how is your other senses when you're blind?
I think the jury is still out. I think there's some grounds to say that a person who's blind, their tactile sense is far superior to a sighted person's tactile sense. I think there's somewhat less grounds to say their hearing is better because they are more attentive to what they hear, and they can detect things through their hearing that a sighted person might not expect them to detect through their hearing. So there's some evidence, I think, for that, but I don't think we can truly measure for sure that.
Yeah, I get it.
So you're trying to address, was I more traumatized because of my senses were amplified? I don't know. I think trauma is caused by the inability to act on your situation. If something really bad's happening to you, it may not be the bad thing that's going on in and of itself that does you. It's the situation that you're in while trying to cope. And if you're in the situation of, I can do nothing, my will has no sovereignty, that's when you have trauma damage caused. It's the lack of your capacity to cope. That would have been the same if I'd had my vision or not. I was a child. Children have no agency, right? They have no legal rights. They have, you don't, what can you do? And I doubt that, I think what the handicap would have done is interfered with the relationships that a handicapped child needs to learn how to build in a healthy way to be healthily integrated with society. Because when you're a child, you're always imposing on somebody in a way anyway, because children require care. And when the disabled child requires more. And what do these drug people and alcohol people want? They want their substance. Anything that interferes with that, that's a problem. As my stepfather would often be like, people, why do I drink? Because of you kids. You kids drive me to drink. And he had particular hatred and loathing for me. And he definitely didn't want my mother paying any attention to me. So he did everything he could to estrange her from me. And he succeeded. And he did everything he could to destroy my connection to my brother and myself. And he succeeded. And I mean, it was just a truly horrible, manipulative human being. And I doubt that sensorially, even if my senses were a bit more vivid, I doubt that was a factor.
Yeah.
How was your relationship with your siblings growing up in an environment that you guys did?
I think when we were both children, me and my brother were all we had, my younger brother. My older brother scared me because he was too volatile. He could be what an older brother is supposed to be, tease your younger brother, razz him, you harass him, maybe smack him around a little bit. But he was unpredictable too, and he scared me kind of. I was distant from my older brother. I didn't feel much rapport with him or affinity. My younger brother and I used to be exceptionally close, but over the years and with the passage of time, that changed. But the only thing that I had really in my life was my brother, my younger brother, and the friends that we had, our group of friends. And when we were children, oftentimes parents could allow their children to just run free. I'm not romanticizing this, it's really the way it was. And that gave me some level of resilience. We could always go outside, and we'd always would run away and go out into the woods, we'd play our own games, we'd get out of that environment for a while. I can't help but feel like that gave me a great deal of resiliency. That had I not had that, I might not have come through that as I have.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, did you ever accidentally expect, your father to be more like a father figure and then get the disappointment?
Yeah, I think my heart was screaming for it my whole life, and I never had it. And it really, I made a lot of poor decisions. I took advice from people I shouldn't have. I made choices that would have been wise had they been more well considered and I made them rashly and quickly? Yeah, I think I did try to cultivate a relationship with him when he was sober as closely as I could. And I held on to him as tightly as I could, but I mean, it wasn't enough, right? It wasn't enough. If you don't have in that critical stage of life, you lose the window. And that left me, I think that left me for many years with a sense of lost. How would you put it? A sense of not being able to really reach. And I would seek out a mentor in one craft or another, some other interest, one way or another. And I was always looking up to other people too much and modeling after other people more, when I should have been paying more attention to self-actualizing.
Did you ever learn to like deal with the disappointment?
Hmm?
Did you ever learn to like deal with the disappointment that you got from like expecting something from your father but never being able to get it? Did it ever get like easier? Or like
I
you
think-
expected less, I guess?
I think I just expected less. There were a couple of times even after he'd been sober when I needed him to help me at critical points when he did not, and it was very jarring to me, you know. I don't know, I haven't really explored that deeply I think probably I just grew to expect less. I think I just limited my expectations.
All right. Any other questions? You want to ask something? Sure.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, do you feel like numb to a lot of your emotions? Well, I think you said that already, that you're numb to a lot of emotions and feelings.
Well, I
especially
don't
going
believe
through all
so.
of that.
I don't know about now. I think I wouldn't say now I'm numb to or disconnected from my emotions.
But more like if something happened, you're like more acceptive, kind of like you won't overreact or get like all devastated, like you're more
Right.
numb to,
I
like,
think
hard
in
situations.
spite of, even if the emotions feel excessive, I've had to build tools across the span of my life that help me sort of to not react to them. I'm somewhat better at regulating them now, but it's primarily in the form of I've learned to recognize not to lose my grounding when these things hit me. It's very, very hard. I think I do get hit excessively hard by depression, depressive feelings, by anger, by I wouldn't call it anxiety. I don't have anxiety, but the fear of failing and disappointing other people has been a disproportionately big influence over me that has been detrimental to my life. Because I've made choices that were toxic, and I put other people's needs ahead of my own. Well, I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to let them down. I don't want to fail them. And I'm sure that was entirely as a result of growing up in this environment where you're not even competing with your fellow siblings. You're competing with a drug. You're competing with something that you can't win against. And I'm certain that and then the handicap would, it would have hurt me had I been any kind of child, but the form that it took in my case was, we don't want to drive you anywhere. What do you mean drive you? You're blind. What do you mean? That's an imposition. What are you putting that on us for? Yeah, it left me with an intoxication of perhaps the gyroscope's broken in that sense as well. I don't fully grasp what is it proper to expect from people in various degrees of relation. What are the proper boundaries? What are the proper expectations? That gyroscope could be smashed in me as well. Or at least one that I cannot trust. And if I act, it has to be more from reason, right, than from emotional, I feel such warmth and rapport. I must be doing the right thing. No, I mean, you can't always trust that. You can't always believe that when you have a smashed gyroscope.
Thank you
Hmm.
for your answers.
Sure, I
And
hope
your
they were
story.
good ones.
Any other questions? No? All right, looks like we are good. I will let you go, and then see you next week.